Kamala Harris and the Democrats got their heads knocked between the washer and the dryer. They lost. I think we need to have a discussion about what do the Democrats even stand for. But okay, let me back this up even further. I bet you're wondering how I got here right now. That was me when I was in Pennsylvania, when I was in Milwaukee. So I was flying around from swing state to swing state. I live in a swing state. I live in Georgia. And I was talking to insiders. I went to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, talking to politicians, Democratic strategists. And I have thoughts after all that about what happened with the election. My first one is going to be controversial. Actually, all of these will probably be controversial. Again, why am I making this video? Please try not to jump me too bad in the comment section. But my first one is I do think that Joe Biden should have stepped down 2 years ago, quite frankly, not quit the presidency, but I think he should have said that he was not going to run for president in 2024 and should have begun priming somebody in that time. But that didn't happen. It felt as though the insiders, the people around him, were hiding his condition. And when he did that debate, the disastrous debate, the shit show of a debate, I don't know what else to call it, they couldn't hide it any further. And it just became painfully obvious. So then the media hits started coming from his own party. And by media hits, I mean the backstabbing, the you need to step down, the trash talking came from his own party. They were talking to the media behind his back and giving anonymous quotes saying, oh, we're going to say this on background, which means that they were saying that, but they didn't want their name and they didn't want their identity to be revealed. And it's like, okay, why didn't you say this 2 years ago? He should have been a transitional president. When he was elected in office, people weren't excited. Most people weren't excited to elect Joe Biden.
How is the best case scenario, Joe Biden?
People were kind of electing him as a placeholder to see what else we got. What else do the Democrats have? But the Democrats didn't have anything else. He ran again. And when it became painfully obvious that he couldn't be successful, there was a chart that was released that apparently the Biden administration knew that he was going to get whooped in the election, like dog piled, but they kept running him, and that's frustrating. So what happened then is that Kamala Harris became the nominee, and truthfully, I feel like she was 100% set up to fail. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did this Instagram live where she was saying, don't be so sure that the Democratic insiders even want Kamala Harris to be the nominee, right? Don't be so sure that she's going to be the one because they don't really support her. And I think that was clear.
I'm going to say what a lot of these folks aren't saying. If you think that there is consensus among the people who want Joe Biden to leave, that they will support Vice President Harris, you would be mistaken.
I think she was essentially sent out like a sacrificial lamb to the slaughter. And strategists were telling her that she could win in a landslide. Strategists were telling us that she was going to win in a landslide. I mean, the entire night of the election, I was in some of these groups talking about the red wave. They were saying that, oh, it's a red mirage. It's a red mirage. Don't worry. The Democrats are going to come back, baby. It wasn't a mirage. It was a red sweep. There was nothing mirage-like about it. It was real. And Republicans won all the swing states. But I do think that the Democratic Party, the issues with the Democratic Party go beyond just this one loss. For months, like I was saying earlier, voters were saying that they're worried about immigration and the economy, immigration and the economy, immigration and the economy. Every time you knock on somebody's door, oh, well, milk prices are high and egg prices are high. I do think that the cost of goods will increase under a Trump presidency. I hope they don't. I do think that, but that doesn't counter the fact that people felt like currently under the Biden-Harris administration, their lives were harder and that they were struggling to make ends meet. And Democrats, instead of addressing that, kept saying, well, we have to save we have to save democracy from Donald Trump. But then when Trump won, this is another issue about the Democrats. Again, we get to this question of they have kind of this wishy-washy message because they kept saying that Trump was going to destroy democracy. He was going to destroy everything. And then he got elected and Democrats were like, well, congratulations. we played a good game, but you won fair and square. It's like, is this person a threat to democracy or not? Because it's not giving that. Because it seems like y'all are like, well, it's fine. We'll just try again in another 4 years. So this whole time, though, you had been priming people to think that there will no longer be elections if Donald Trump wins. Like, what's going on here? You really shouldn't ignore the economic anxiety argument. And I get that some people are not receptive to this because they feel like individuals say economic anxiety when really they just mean we don't want to vote for a Black woman. We don't want to vote for a woman. We don't want to vote for a minority woman. But surely everybody is not saying economic anxiety to hide these other bigoted feelings. I don't think that's true. Some people are in food deserts. Rent prices are high. People are really struggling to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis. And if you look at the macro level might say, oh, inflation is cooling, right? This is a long-term plan, or food prices are going to go down, or rent prices are going to go down. If you look at this chart shows that food prices are actually on an incline, or a decline to decrease, and the 2.47 and the stock market. Nobody want to hear about that. People on a micro level, regular people door to door, don't want to hear about whatever you have to say about that chart over there, what the numbers say, what the stock market is doing. People are worried about the check that they're bringing in or not bringing in, and concerned about how they're not making enough money, which I really ultimately think the true issue is about how they're not making enough money to have a steady living. I think the Democrats really struggle with meeting people where they are. So people are like, oh, I can't afford rent. And the Harris campaign might be like, oh, well, we're actually going to give you a small business tax credit. Thanks. But in my immediate future, my immediate need is I am struggling on my day to day. And the Harris campaign is like, don't worry, we're actually going to write this policy. You see what I mean? And the Democrats focused a lot on reproductive justice. And I think reproductive justice is important. That is something that's highly, highly important to me. That goes without saying if you watch some of my other content. But the thing is, it's not that reproductive justice wasn't important. People really cared about that, but they didn't care about it over putting food on their table, right? Their immediate needs were housing, shelter. So they didn't care about the reproductive justice to the point where they would vote for you for president. And what you actually saw was people split the vote. So these reproductive justice initiatives were successful. The majority of them, whenever people are able to vote about a reproductive justice issue, the votes are usually positive. So you saw that happening, but at the same time, you saw people not voting for Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket because they just didn't agree with the other policies. And I think people were confused about how could you vote for reproductive justice, but then vote against Kamala Harris. And I think that's where you saw the clash. And that brings me to another point. And that point is every minority group has shifted right a little bit, particularly in this election. Every minority right group has shifted right a little bit. I'm not saying that means shifted right extremely. We know that Black voters voted in a high percentage for Kamala Harris and for Democrats, and consistently have. But that doesn't mean that a portion that Trump, Republicans in general, have slowly been eating into that voter block. And Republicans have been picking up votes across all minority groups. And for me, I think Democrats, the lesson they need to learn is that they do not have minority groups on lock. Democrats, I think, tend to look at minority groups as a monolith and think, well, we know that Black people, for example, are going to vote for us regardless, and they need to stop thinking that. There's a growing frustration that Democrats take Black voters for granted, take minority voters for granted, and don't have to do a lot to earn the vote. And they absolutely do have to earn the vote, whether they like it or not. I see sometimes my comment section will say, well, Republicans don't have to earn votes. I mean, Democrats do. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, just because you don't like the state of the race doesn't mean that that's not the state of the race. And I actually do think that Republicans have to earn votes. And I do think that they kowtow or they bend over to the will of their base, whether that's good or bad. I absolutely do think that Republican candidates campaign and do what needs to be done to convince voters to vote for them. When it comes to immigration, we can also talk about how Democrats also sometimes appear to treat a group as a monolith. If you talk to a Latino voter, for example, and you start talking to them about immigration and deportation, that's not going to hit the way you think it hits. For one, if the voter is a Latino voter, obviously they're an American citizen because you can't vote unless you're a citizen. And so you're talking to that person about deportation. They're not at risk of deportation. They're a United States citizen. You know what I mean? Again, you're treating people as a monolith. You're acting as though Latino voters don't care about the economy just like everybody else who lives in America, right? This is, again, it's a disconnect that Democrats have, just treating an entire voting block of people as though they all care about one thing. And it's just not true. Democrats, you're going to have to work on that. And when you talk about the Democrats and their campaign strategy, oftentimes they come across as just the party that opposes the Republicans. Like, oh, we are always trying to play defense against the Republicans and not going on offense. And I do think that Kamala Harris throughout her campaign tried to switch that a little bit. But I don't really think we see that a lot with the Democrats. They're always talking about, oh man, we tried to pass this bill, but the Republicans, they stopped us. What are we going to do now? The Republicans keep obstructing us. And it's like, girl, if the Republicans have that much power, people are going to be like, why are we voting for you? Clearly, the Republicans get the job done. So we don't understand why we're even voting for you in the first place. You understand? Even when it comes to the border bill, Democrats were consistently like, well, we tried to put up this border bill and Donald Trump, he called his people and he got the border bill not to pass. Stink. If Donald Trump is that powerful when he's not even in office, what you think people aren't going to vote for him? He's clearly showing that he can run things even when he's not in office. You know what I mean? So they have to stop coming across as just we're trying to stop Republicans and get more conviction. But also, and I want to hit it harder again, what do you stand for? Because when Democrats are out of office, they're like, wow, Republicans, we shouldn't call anyone illegal. We should call people undocumented immigrants, or we think that everybody should at least have some sort of opportunity to come inside. And we want to go and be open and kumbaya, all that good stuff. And then they get in office, Democrats get in office, and they're like, actually, you immigrants, hit the road, Jack. Don't come. Get out of here. We actually want to be more strict on the border.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come.
We stand on with everyone in certain marginalized communities, right? We want to be on your side, and then they're in office and they're like, Republicans, maybe they were kind of eating a little bit on a couple of these topics. And again, it's like, okay, well, there's already a Republican in the race. If there's already a Republican in the race, I don't need to vote for you. I'll just vote for the Republican. People talk about, oh, the Democrats, they needed to go more left, more right. We could truly debate about that all day. But I do think that identity is shifting in America, whereas a lot of people in years prior identified in terms of their racial class, white, black, whatever. And I think people still do that, certainly to a extent, maybe even to a high extent. But I also think that people identify more so with their working class, and people, whether they want to buck the system or go along with the status quo, continue along with the status quo. I think that's something that people really are connecting with these days. And when Democrats represent more of the status quo, when they align more with things being like they used to be as they were prior, that's a problem for people, because people don't want establishment. People don't trust the establishment. People don't like the establishment. And Democrats represent the establishment, and they've got to separate. Democrats do exceptionally well with college educated people, suburban people. I think they do well. I think Kamala Harris did well. Decently with white voters, college educated people across the spectrum. And that's not the majority of America, right? And so again, you are focusing on this demographic that is not going to be the majority of your voting base. And you need to get out and you need to talk to more people, working class people. And the Democrats are being seen as the party of the elites and not the party of the working class. That is a messaging issue that Democrats need to deal with. We have to also get into the media strategy a little bit, and I'm still formulating my full thoughts and opinions on this, because I do think that Kamala Harris went a lot of places. Some people are criticizing Kamala Harris, saying that she didn't go everywhere. For example, she didn't go on the Joe Rogan podcast, and obviously that's it's like the number one podcast, period. Very popular podcast to go on, and she didn't go there. She couldn't go to him. I think she asked for him to go to her because she was campaigning for like 100 days. She didn't have that much time, and it fell through. He ended up endorsing Trump, which he probably would have endorsed Trump regardless. I really don't think if she interviewed with him, he would have not endorsed Trump. But that's one of the critiques that people have. I don't really have that critique, but I will say that you saw, I think, Donald Trump hitting the non-traditional media landscapes a lot more. You saw him going on those podcasts, spending hours with those podcasts. He really doesn't talk to traditional media much. He doesn't really like traditional media. You saw Kamala Harris and Tim Walz doing a decent amount of traditional media, not too much. I don't think traditional media overshadowed the other media. And I do think that they did shun traditional media for a while in the beginning, which I think was correct for them to do. But I don't think that they hit the non-traditional media outlets as much as Trump did. And I think Democrats should change that. You also see that this information ecosystem on the right side is much more powerful than what the Democrats have. This is something that certainly concerns me. I don't know if the Democrats themselves need to put more money into it or if they need somebody else to put more money into it, because I quite frankly don't know who's funding all of these Republican, these right-wing channels and platforms. I don't know if there are outside agitators, I'm going to put it that way, forming them. But I do think that this disparity has helped Trump win the messaging war, and Democrats need to get more creative, think outside the box. And by that, I don't mean hiring, college educated, the Democratic strategist who they've been hiring forever. I think they really need to clean house, get new strategists and new people on board. I think if Democrats continue on their same path, they have an affinity for losing, and that's unusual for any person. In 2024, we saw a complex list of challenges: economic anxiety, immigration concerns, right? People are concerned about the border, whether you think that's true or not. And all these issues came to a head. The Democratic Party certainly has an uphill battle ahead of them. I don't think it's an insurmountable battle, because I don't think that this was a referendum completely on the Democratic Party, as they did lose. But I don't think that Trump was so popular that Democrats can't come back, but they have to learn the lessons. And I'm afraid they won't learn the lessons, because if you look at MSNBC, CNN, they're blaming all the same old stuff. And I'm like, I fear y'all are going to be losers forever. But the Democratic Party can chart a path forward. But I really think the key thing that they're going to have to understand or figure out is, what do they stand for?